What made you destroy your brother's career after protecting him for 20 years? My brother Julian called at 2 o'clock in the morning asking me to pick him up from a motel on Route 9. His voice was shaking when he said, "Cassie, I need you right now. Don't ask questions, just come." I threw on clothes and drove the 40 minutes to find him sitting on the curb with blood on his shirt and a girl's pink backpack next to him. When I asked whose backpack it was, he looked at me with those same pleading eyes he'd used since we were kids and said, "It's not what you think." But his hands were trembling so badly he couldn't zip his jacket, and the backpack had a name tag that said Emma Rodriguez, age 9. I asked where Emma was, and he said she was fine. Her mom picked her up already. This was all a misunderstanding. Then why was there blood on his shirt? He touched his nose and said he'd gotten a nosebleed. Totally random. Happened while he was waiting. I looked at the motel room door behind him, number 12 with the light still on inside. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. That instinct you get when someone you love is lying but you're not ready to admit it. I drove him home in silence while he stared out the window. He lived in a condo downtown, the one I'd helped him buy after his divorce 3 years ago. I'd co-signed the mortgage because his credit was damaged from the separation. When we pulled up, he grabbed the backpack quickly before I could look inside it and said, "Thanks for coming. I'll explain everything later." But he never did explain. He avoided my calls for a week, sent short texts saying he was busy with work. Julian was a guidance counselor at Riverside Middle School, had been for 12 years. The kids loved him because he was the cool counselor who let them eat lunch in his office when they had friendship drama. Parents trusted him completely. Our mother bragged about him constantly, her son who dedicated his life to helping troubled children. I'd spent 2 decades protecting Julian from consequences. When he was 16 and crashed Dad's car drunk, I took the blame and lost my license for 6 months. When he cheated his way through college, I wrote half his papers. When his wife filed for divorce after finding suspicious texts on his phone, I testified about her mental instability, even though I knew she was telling the truth. I'd always been the older sister who fixed his problems, cleaned up his messes, made excuses for his mistakes. That's what family did, right? You protected each other no matter what. Our father died when Julian was 14 and I was 18, and Mom had made me promise to look after him. She'd gripped my hand at the funeral and whispered, "He needs you now. You're all he has." So I'd spent my entire adult life being his safety net, his excuse maker, his defender against every consequence he deserved. I'd sacrificed job opportunities to stay close to him. I'd lost friends who got tired of his drama. I'd even pushed away a serious boyfriend who said I enabled Julian's worst behavior. But family loyalty meant something to me, or at least I thought it did. 3 weeks after the motel pickup, a detective named Rita Alvarez showed up at my office. She was maybe 45 with sharp eyes and a folder thick with papers. She asked if I was Cassandra Wells, sister to Julian Wells. I said yes, and she asked when I'd last seen my brother. I told her about picking him up from the motel 3 weeks ago, and her expression changed immediately. She opened the folder and showed me a photo of a young girl with dark hair and braces. "Do you know Emma Rodriguez?" she asked. I said I'd seen her name on a backpack but never met her. Rita leaned forward and said Emma had been reported missing for 4 hours that night, before her mother found her at that motel. Emma told police a man from her school had picked her up, said her mom was in an accident, drove her to the motel and kept her there until she managed to call her mother from the bathroom. Emma described the man as her guidance counselor. Rita watched my face carefully as she said, "Your brother Julian is currently under investigation for child endangerment and possible abduction. We're building a case, but we need witnesses. You picked him up that night. What did you see?" My mouth went dry. I wanted to say Julian would never hurt a child, that there had to be a misunderstanding, but I kept seeing that pink backpack and his trembling hands and the blood on his shirt. Rita said Emma's mother had taken her to the hospital immediately. There was evidence of physical restraint, bruising on her wrists consistent with being held down. Emma was too traumatized to give many details, kept shutting down during interviews, but she'd identified Julian from a photo lineup without hesitation. She'd also described his car perfectly, including the dent on the passenger side door from when I'd backed into a pole last year borrowing it. Rita said they'd subpoenaed Julian's phone records and found deleted texts with several students. Nothing explicitly illegal, but the pattern was concerning. Messages sent late at night, compliments about appearance, requests to meet privately. The school was conducting its own investigation, but Julian had hired an expensive lawyer who was blocking access to his office computer. Rita asked again what I'd seen that night. I told her about the backpack, the blood, his shaking hands, how he'd grabbed the bag before I could look inside. She took notes on everything, then asked if I'd testify if this went to trial. I said I needed to talk to Julian first, and she nodded slowly. "Of course. But Ms. Wells, I've been doing this for 18 years. I've seen a lot of families protect predators because they can't believe someone they love is capable of this. I've watched evidence get destroyed, witnesses change their stories, victims get intimidated into silence. Your brother is a guidance counselor with access to vulnerable children every single day. If Emma's telling the truth, and I believe she is, then he's been doing this for a while. Predators don't start with abduction. They build up to it." She handed me her card and said to call anytime, day or night. After she left, I sat in my car for an hour trying to convince myself Rita was wrong. Julian had his problems, sure, He'd always been irresponsible, selfish, immature. But hurting children? That was impossible. Except I kept remembering his divorce. His ex-wife Anna had said things during the custody battle about why she didn't want him alone with their daughter. Things I'd dismissed as vindictive lies meant to hurt him. Anna had fought for supervised visitation only, claiming Julian made her uncomfortable around children. I'd called her paranoid and helped Julian's lawyer paint her as unstable. I drove to Julian's condo without calling first. He answered the door in sweatpants, unshaven, looking like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw my face, he tried to close the door, but I pushed past him. "We need to talk about Emma Rodriguez," I said. He went pale and backed toward the couch. "I don't know what that detective told you, but it's all lies. That girl's mother hates me because I reported her to CPS last year for neglect. This is revenge." I asked why he was at a motel with a 9-year-old girl at 2 o'clock in the morning. He had a whole story ready. Emma had called him crying, said her mom's boyfriend was hitting her, begged him to come get her. He'd panicked and picked her up, took her somewhere safe while he figured out what to do. He was going to call the police, but then Emma's mom showed up screaming and threatening him. The blood on his shirt was from Emma's nosebleed. She got them all the time from allergies. He'd grabbed the backpack so he could return it later with her homework inside. The story was smooth, practiced, almost believable. Almost. I asked why he didn't call me immediately if it was innocent. Why avoid me for 3 weeks? Why did Emma tell police he'd abducted her? Julian's face twisted with anger. Because she's a troubled kid who makes up stories for attention. I've been trying to help her for months, and this is how she repays me. Her mother coached her to say those things. The whole family is trash, Cassie. You know how some of these families are. That phrase made my stomach turn. These families. I'd heard him use it before, always with contempt. Always about the low-income students who needed his help the most. I asked about the text messages Rita mentioned. His jaw clenched. Those are taken out of context. I was being supportive. These kids need someone who cares about them. I tell them they're smart and pretty because nobody else does. There's nothing wrong with building their self-esteem. I asked if I could see his phone. He said his lawyer told him not to show anyone anything. That's when I knew Rita was right. Julian wasn't acting like an innocent man. He was acting like someone who'd been caught. I left his apartment and sat in my car, hands shaking on the steering wheel. 20 years of protection, of making excuses, of choosing him over truth. I thought about Anna and the custody battle. How she'd cried on the stand describing her discomfort with Julian around their daughter. How I'd dismissed her concerns as jealousy and vindictiveness. How I'd helped Julian get unsupervised visitation by testifying about what a devoted father he was. Their daughter Lily was 11 now, living primarily with Anna. I hadn't seen her in over a year because Julian said Anna was poisoning her against him. But what if Anna had been right all along? What if I'd helped a predator gain access to his own child? I called Rita and said I'd testify to everything I saw that night. She asked if I was sure, warned me that Julian would probably never forgive me, that my family might take his side. I said I understood. Then I asked if she could check on Lily, Julian's daughter, make sure she was safe. Rita's voice softened. "We're already on it. Anna contacted us 2 years ago with concerns, but we didn't have enough evidence to pursue it. She's been documenting everything." The next morning, I called Anna for the first time since the divorce. She was silent when I identified myself, then said, "If you're calling to defend Julian, I don't want to hear it." I told her I was calling to apologize, that I'd been wrong about everything, that I'd helped him hurt her and possibly their daughter, and I'd never forgive myself. She started crying. "I tried to tell you. I tried to tell everyone. But he's so good at making people believe him. Even the judge thought I was being hysterical." She described finding texts on Julian's phone 3 years ago between him and a 13-year-old student. Nothing explicitly sexual, but disturbing. Compliments about her body developing. Questions about whether she had a boyfriend. When Anna confronted him, Julian said she was misinterpreting innocent mentoring. He'd convinced her she was crazy for even thinking something inappropriate. But then she'd started noticing how Lily would get quiet and withdrawn after weekend visits with Julian. How she'd refused to talk about what they did together. How she'd started having nightmares and wetting the bed again at age 9. Anna took Lily to a therapist who'd expressed concerns, but Julian threatened to sue for parental alienation if Anna suggested anything inappropriate. Anna said she'd kept a detailed journal of every concerning incident over the years, times when Lily came home with unexplained bruises, times when Julian had been rough during bath time when Lily was younger, times when he'd insisted on privacy during their visits, telling Anna she was being controlling when she asked to stay. The therapist had recommended supervised visitation, but Julian's lawyer had blocked it by painting Anna as a vindictive ex-wife making false accusations. I'd helped him do that. I'd testified that Anna was mentally unstable, that she'd always been jealous of Julian's bond with Lily, that she was using their daughter as a weapon. The judge had believed me because I was the neutral third party, the concerned aunt who just wanted what was best for her niece. I delivered the testimony that gave Julian unsupervised access to Lily for 3 more years. Anna asked if I'd be willing to recant my testimony and help her file for emergency custody. I said yes immediately. She gave me the name of her lawyer, Richard Chen, who was building a case. That afternoon, I met with Richard in his office downtown. He was younger than I expected. maybe 35, with tired eyes that suggested he'd seen too much. Richard explained that Anna's case had always been circumstantial, concerning behavior, but nothing provable. Julian was careful, never left physical evidence, always had explanations. But Emma Rodriguez changed everything. She was the first victim to report immediately, before Julian could manipulate the situation. The rape kit showed she'd been restrained. Her phone records proved she hadn't called Julian for help. Security footage from a gas station showed Julian's car headed toward Emma's school at 3:45, right when she got out. He'd been hunting her. Richard said the district attorney was building a criminal case, but it would take months. In the meantime, Julian still had unsupervised access to Lily every other weekend. They needed to file for emergency custody modification, and my testimony would be critical. I'd have to admit I lied during the divorce proceedings. I'd have to explain how Julian had manipulated me into helping him. I'd have to face the possibility of perjury charges for my false testimony. Richard said the DA probably wouldn't pursue charges against me if I cooperated fully, but he couldn't guarantee anything. I told him I'd do whatever it took to protect Lily. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for the following week. Julian's lawyer, Patricia Winters, was one of the most aggressive family attorneys in the state. She'd already started spreading rumors that Anna and I had conspired to destroy Julian's reputation because we were both bitter about failed relationships with him, which was insane since I was his sister. But Patricia didn't care about logic. She cared about winning. The night before the hearing, Julian showed up at my apartment. I watched through the peephole as he pounded on the door. "Cassie, open up. We need to talk about what you're doing." I didn't answer. He kept pounding, his voice getting louder. "You're destroying our family over lies. Mom is devastated. Do you understand what you're doing to her? To me? I'm your brother. You're supposed to protect me." I called the police and he finally left, but not before shouting through the door that I was dead to him. My mother had already left me 3 voicemails. I hadn't listened to them. I knew what she'd say. That I was betraying Julian, choosing strangers over family, believing malicious lies designed to hurt her baby boy. She'd raised us to protect each other above everything else. The hearing started at 9 o'clock in the morning in family court. Judge Andrea Walsh presided, a woman in her 60s with a reputation for protecting children above parental rights. Anna sat with Richard on one side of the courtroom. Julian sat with Patricia on the other. I was called as the first witness. Patricia objected to my testimony before I even sat down, claiming I was biased and unreliable. Judge Walsh overruled her and told me to proceed. I stated my name and relationship to Julian. Richard asked me to describe my testimony during the original custody hearing 3 years ago. I explained that I'd testified Anna was mentally unstable and vindictive, that she was using Lily as a weapon against Julian, that Julian was a devoted father who only wanted what was best for his daughter. Richard asked if that testimony was truthful. I said no. The courtroom went silent. Richard asked me to explain. I described how Julian had coached me on what to say, how he'd shown me text messages from Anna that he'd edited to make her look irrational, how he'd convinced me that Anna was trying to punish him for moving on after the divorce, how I'd believed him because he was my brother and I'd spent 20 years protecting him from consequences. Patricia stood up, her voice sharp with accusation. "So you're admitting to perjury? You lied under oath to help your brother, and now you're lying to hurt him? Why should this court believe anything you say?" I looked directly at Julian. "Because I saw what he did to Emma Rodriguez. I picked him up from a motel at 2 o'clock in the morning with a 9-year-old girl's backpack and blood on his shirt. I watched him lie about it. I watched him manipulate the situation exactly like he's manipulated me my entire life. And I realized I'd rather face consequences for lying then than help him hurt another child now." Richard asked me to describe that night in detail. I told them everything. The shaking hands, the pink backpack with Emma's name, the blood he claimed was from a nosebleed, how he'd grabbed the bag before I could look inside, how he'd avoided me for weeks afterward. Patricia tried to discredit me by pointing out my history of protecting Julian. "You've lied for him repeatedly. You've admitted to perjury. You've covered up his mistakes for 2 decades. Why should we believe this sudden change of heart isn't just another lie?" I said, because I finally understood what those mistakes actually were. Judge Walsh asked if I'd had any contact with Lily recently. I said no. Julian had cut off my access to her over a year ago, after I'd questioned why Lily seemed so anxious during visits. The judge made notes, then asked Anna to present evidence of concerning behavior. Anna detailed 3 years of documented incidents. Lily's regression in behavior after visits, the nightmares, the bedwetting, the sudden fear of being alone with adult men, her therapist's recommendations for supervised visitation, Julian's aggressive response to any questions about his time with Lily. Anna also presented the journal she'd kept, thick with entries describing Lily's changing behavior. Richard submitted the therapist's report, which explicitly stated concerns about possible inappropriate contact. Patricia objected to everything, calling it speculation and parental alienation. She presented Julian's employment records showing 12 years of exemplary service as a guidance counselor, letters from parents praising his dedication to students, awards for Counselor of the Year. She argued that Anna was a bitter ex-wife using false allegations to hurt Julian's career, and I was a disgruntled sister angry about some personal slight. Judge Walsh called a recess to review the evidence. During the break, I sat in the hallway avoiding eye contact with Julian. My mother appeared, her face twisted with anger. How could you do this to him? To our family? She'd always chosen Julian over me, always made excuses for him. When I'd lost my license covering for his drunk driving, she'd said I should have been more careful. When I'd sacrificed college opportunities to stay close and help him, she'd said that's what good sisters do. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn her approval by protecting Julian, and now she looked at me like I was a stranger. I told her Julian hurt Emma Rodriguez. She said that girl was lying for attention, and I was destroying her son's life over nothing. I asked if she'd rather wait until he hurt Lily too. She slapped me across the face right there in the courthouse hallway. Security had to intervene and remove her from the building. I sat there with my cheek burning, realizing I'd just lost my entire family. But when I thought about Lily being forced to spend weekends with Julian, it didn't matter. Some things were more important than family loyalty. Judge Walsh called us back into the courtroom 30 minutes later. She addressed Julian directly. Mr. Wells, I've reviewed the evidence presented today along with the ongoing criminal investigation into the Emma Rodriguez incident. While that case is still pending, this court's primary concern is the safety of your daughter, Lily. The pattern of behavior described by Ms. Anna Wells is consistent with grooming and inappropriate contact. The testimony from your sister, despite her history of protecting you, shows a concerning incident that corroborates the allegations in the criminal case. Most significantly, Lily's therapist has expressed serious concerns about her welfare during unsupervised visits with you. Patricia tried to interrupt, but Judge Walsh cut her off. I'm granting emergency supervised visitation only until the criminal case is resolved. All visits will take place at a supervised visitation center with trained monitors present. You will not be alone with Lily under any circumstances. Additionally, I'm ordering a forensic evaluation of Lily by a court-appointed child psychologist to determine if any abuse has occurred. If that evaluation shows evidence of inappropriate contact, I will terminate your parental rights entirely. Julian's face went red. He started to stand, but Patricia grabbed his arm and forced him back down. The judge continued, Ms. Cassandra Wells, you've admitted to perjury during the original custody proceedings. I'm referring your testimony to the district attorney's office for potential charges. However, I'm also noting your cooperation in protecting a child once you understood the truth. That will factor into any charging decision. She banged her gavel. We're adjourned. Anna sobbed with relief. Julian stared at me with pure hatred. Patricia was already on her phone, probably calling reporters to spin the story. I walked out of the courthouse knowing I'd just destroyed my relationship with my brother and mother, possibly facing criminal charges myself, but Lily would be safe. That night, Rita called with an update. The school board had placed Julian on immediate administrative leave pending the criminal investigation. Several former students had come forward after hearing about Emma Rodriguez, girls who'd received inappropriate texts, been called to his office for private conversations that made them uncomfortable, been touched in ways that felt wrong, but they hadn't known how to report. The pattern went back years. Rita said they were building a strong case, but trials took time. Julian's lawyer was already threatening to sue everyone involved for defamation. I spent the next 3 weeks giving statements to multiple investigators. The district attorney handling Julian's criminal case, the school board's internal investigator, the state licensing board reviewing his counselor certification. Each time I had to describe that night at the motel, I felt sicker. I'd almost driven him home and forgotten about it. Almost believed his lies one more time. The only reason I'd called Rita was because Emma's mother had filed a missing person report that led police to the motel. If Emma had been too scared to call her mother, if Julian had convinced her not to tell, I would have covered for him without even knowing it. The forensic evaluation of Lily took 6 weeks. Anna called me the day she got the results, her voice barely a whisper. She told them everything. What he did to her. How he said it was their special secret. How he said Mom would be angry if she told. How he said I'd take her away if anyone found out. Lily had been suffering silently for 3 years while Julian molested her during their unsupervised visits. The psychologist's report was 40 pages of detailed testimony from an 11-year-old girl describing systematic sexual abuse by her father. I couldn't breathe. I'd helped him get access to her. I'd testified that he was a devoted father. I'd called Anna mentally unstable for trying to protect her own daughter. The weight of that guilt felt like drowning. Anna said Lily was in intensive therapy now, but she'd probably carry these scars forever. I don't blame you, Anna said quietly. He manipulated you the same way he manipulated me and Lily and all those other girls. That's what predators do. They're good at making people trust them. But I blamed myself. 20 years of enabling, of looking away, of choosing family loyalty over truth. How many chances had I had to see who Julian really was? His ex-girlfriend in college who'd broken up with him after he got too intense with her younger sister? The way he'd always volunteered to coach youth sports teams but got fired for boundary issues? The string of jobs at different schools because parents had complained about his behavior with female students? I'd explained away every red flag as misunderstanding or bad luck. The criminal trial started 4 months later. The prosecution had 6 victims willing to testify, including Emma Rodriguez and Lily. The defense strategy was to attack each girl's credibility individually. Patricia Winters painted Emma as a troubled child from a dysfunctional home, Lily as a pawn in a custody battle, the others as attention-seeking teenagers who'd misinterpreted innocent mentoring. I testified on day 3 about picking Julian up from the motel. Patricia's cross-examination was brutal. She spent an hour detailing every lie I'd told for Julian over the years. Every time I'd covered for him, made excuses, protected him from consequences. She asked the jury why they should believe a self-admitted liar who'd committed perjury to help her brother. "Isn't it possible," Patricia said, her voice dripping with skepticism, "that you're lying now to make up for your guilty conscience? That you're exaggerating what you saw that night to punish yourself for helping him?" I looked at the jury and said, "I am guilty. I protected a predator for 20 years because I didn't want to see the truth. But I'm not lying about what I saw that night. Julian had a 9-year-old girl's backpack, blood on his shirt, and he was shaking so badly he couldn't zip his jacket. Those are facts. The question isn't whether I'm credible. The question is whether you're going to let him keep hurting children." Patricia objected, but Judge Walsh had already let me finish. Emma Rodriguez testified the next day via closed-circuit video. She described Julian pulling up next to her after school, saying her mother had been in an accident and he needed to take her to the hospital. She'd trusted him because he was her guidance counselor, the adult at school who was supposed to help kids. He'd driven her to the motel instead and locked the door. Emma's voice was small and scared as she described what happened in that room. How he'd grabbed her wrists when she tried to leave. How he'd told her she was special. That he'd been watching her for months. That they had a connection. How she'd managed to reach her phone in her backpack while he was in the bathroom and called her mother. How her mother had called the police and shown up 30 minutes later, pounding on the motel room door. Julian had let Emma go and tried to explain it away as a misunderstanding, but her mother had seen the terror on her face. The defense tried to argue that Emma had been coached, that her testimony was inconsistent with her initial statement. The prosecutor showed that Emma's initial statement had been given while she was in shock, and the inconsistencies were minor details about timing, not about what Julian had done. Lily's testimony was even worse. She described 3 years of weekend visits where Julian had progressively crossed boundaries, started with inappropriate touching during wrestling games, moved to making her sit on his lap while wearing only underwear, eventually escalated to sexual contact that she didn't have words to describe. She said he'd told her it was normal, that all fathers did this with their daughters, that it meant he loved her. When she'd tried to tell her mother, Julian had said Anna would never believe her and would probably send her away. The jury heard from 5 other girls, all former students of Julian's. They described a pattern of grooming behavior, compliments about their appearance that escalated to comments about their bodies, private meetings in his office where he'd lock the door, text messages that started supportive and became increasingly inappropriate. One girl, Ashley, described how Julian had touched her during a counseling session about her anxiety, saying massage would help her relax. Another, Brianna, said Julian had driven her home from school once and made sexual comments about her development. Each girl had thought she was the only one, too ashamed or confused to report. The defense called character witnesses who testified about Julian's dedication to helping troubled youth, former colleagues who'd never seen anything inappropriate, parents who said Julian had helped their children through difficult times. Patricia argued the prosecution's case was built on coached testimony from troubled girls with grudges. She claimed Emma's mother had a history of making false accusations, that Anna had poisoned Lily against Julian during the custody battle, that the other girls were seeking attention or settlement money. She painted Julian as a devoted counselor being destroyed by false allegations from disturbed children. The closing arguments lasted a full day. The prosecutor displayed photos of each victim, young faces with haunted eyes, and asked the jury, "How many children need to tell you the same story before you believe them?" Emma Rodriguez, Lily Wells, Ashley Chen, Brianna Santos, Katie Morrison, Jen Patterson, 6 girls who don't know each other, from different schools and backgrounds, all describing the same pattern of behavior. The defendant used his position of trust to access vulnerable children. He groomed them systematically. He hurt them. And when they tried to tell, he destroyed their credibility. That's what predators do. They choose victims no one will believe. But this time, the evidence is overwhelming. Patricia's closing focused on reasonable doubt. The prosecution wants you to believe 6 troubled children over a man with 12 years of exemplary service. But inconsistencies in their testimonies create doubt. The lack of physical evidence creates doubt. The possible coaching from vindictive ex-wives and attention-seeking mothers creates doubt. You cannot convict based on emotion. You must follow the law, and the law requires proof beyond reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for 3 days. I sat in the courthouse hallway each day, unable to eat or sleep. Anna was there too, holding Lily's hand, both of them looking exhausted. On the 3rd day, the jury sent a note saying they'd reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. Julian looked confident when the jury walked in. Patricia had convinced him they'd managed to create enough doubt. The foreperson stood up, a middle-aged woman who'd cried during Lily's testimony. Judge Walsh asked if they'd reached a unanimous verdict. "We have, Your Honor." The foreperson read from the paper in shaking hands. On count 1, endangerment of a minor, we find the defendant guilty. On count 2, attempted kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. On count 3, sexual assault of a minor, we find the defendant guilty. She continued through all 18 counts. Guilty on every single one. Julian's face went blank with shock. Patricia immediately stood to request bail pending sentencing, but Judge Walsh denied it. Mr. Wells has shown himself to be a clear danger to children. He used his position of authority to systematically abuse vulnerable minors over multiple years. Bail is denied. Security handcuffed Julian right there in the courtroom. As they led him away, he looked directly at me and mouthed, "This is your fault." Maybe it was. If I'd stopped protecting him years ago, maybe Lily and those other girls wouldn't have been hurt. Or maybe he would have found victims regardless. I'd never know. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. Anna and I sat together in the victim section as Judge Walsh detailed Julian's crimes. "Mr. Wells, you were entrusted with the care and guidance of children during their most vulnerable years. You betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. You used your position to access, groom, and abuse multiple minors. You showed no remorse during trial and continue to maintain your innocence despite overwhelming evidence. The law allows me to sentence you to up to 40 years in prison. Given the number of victims, the systematic nature of your crimes, and your complete lack of accountability, I'm sentencing you to 35 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for 25 years. Julian didn't react, just stared straight ahead as if this was happening to someone else. His lawyer filed an appeal the next day, which was expected, but the conviction was solid. 6 victims, physical evidence, expert testimony, my eyewitness account of the motel incident. The appeal would fail. My mother stopped speaking to me entirely. She sent one letter saying I'd destroyed Julian's life with lies, that she had no daughter anymore. Several relatives took her side, accusing me of betraying family for attention. Others quietly reached out to say they'd always suspected something was wrong with Julian, but hadn't known how to address it. My father's sister told me she'd tried to warn our parents about Julian's behavior around her daughters years ago, but they'd dismissed her as overreacting. The pattern had been there all along. We'd all just chosen not to see it. The district attorney declined to prosecute me for perjury, citing my cooperation and testimony as a key factor in securing Julian's conviction. Richard helped Anna file for termination of Julian's parental rights, which the court granted immediately. Lily would never have to see him again. I started volunteering with an organization that helped families of abuse victims, other siblings who'd protected predators, parents who'd missed warning signs, family members struggling with guilt and shame. Talking to them helped me understand that predators are skilled manipulators who exploit family loyalty. They know people want to believe the best about their loved ones. They weaponize that trust. One woman I met through the organization had protected her husband for 15 years while he molested their daughter. When she finally believed her daughter and reported him, her entire family turned against her for destroying his career. Another man had covered for his brother's inappropriate behavior with children for a decade, always finding excuses until his nephew finally reported abuse. The guilt they carried was crushing, but staying silent would have been worse. Emma Rodriguez's mother contacted me a year after the trial. Emma was doing better in therapy but still struggled with trust. Her mother wanted me to know that my testimony had validated her, immediately calling the police that night. If I'd dismissed what I'd seen, if I'd helped Julian explain it away, Emma might have been too scared to report. Lily sent me a letter on her 13th birthday. "Dear Aunt Cassie, Mom said I could write to you if I wanted. My therapist says I should tell people how I feel. I was really angry at you for a long time because you helped Dad get unsupervised visits. But my therapist explained that he tricked you too. She said predators are good at making people trust them. I wanted to say thank you for finally believing us. Mom said you gave up your whole family to protect me. That's the bravest thing I ever heard of. I'm doing okay now. I still have nightmares sometimes, but they're getting better. I play soccer and I'm learning guitar. Normal stuff. Thank you for choosing me over him." I cried reading that letter. Lily was thriving despite what Julian had done to her. Emma was healing. The other girls were getting therapy and support. That wouldn't have happened if I'd kept protecting Julian. 3 years after his conviction, I ran into Patricia Winters at a legal conference. She approached me, surprisingly friendly, and said, "That was a solid case. Your testimony about the motel was the turning point." Once the jury heard that from his own sister, they couldn't ignore the pattern. I asked if she really believed Julian was innocent. She shrugged. "I believed he deserved a vigorous defense. That's my job. But off the record, I've represented enough predators to recognize one. Your brother was guilty as hell." 5 years later, Julian's appeal was denied by the state Supreme Court. He was moved to a maximum security facility where he'd serve out his sentence. According to prison records, he'd been placed in protective custody after other inmates learned he was a child molester. He'd never acknowledged what he did, never apologized to his victims, never showed remorse. In his mind, he was the victim of a conspiracy, destroyed by vindictive women and coached children. I received occasional letters from him, always blaming me, always claiming innocence. I stopped reading them after the first few. My mother died without ever speaking to me again. At her funeral, relatives I hadn't seen in years either avoided me completely or quietly thanked me for doing the right thing. The family was permanently fractured, split between those who believed Julian's victims and those who clung to the fantasy of his innocence. I made peace with being estranged from half my family. Some relationships weren't worth maintaining. I eventually started dating someone I met through the victim advocacy organization, another volunteer whose sister had been abused by their uncle. He understood the complex guilt of realizing you'd enabled a predator. We didn't talk about it much, but the shared experience created a foundation of understanding. Normal dating couldn't compete with someone who'd lived through similar pain and come out determined to help others. I changed careers, got my counseling license, and now work specifically with siblings of abuse victims, helping them process the guilt and anger and confusion of discovering someone they loved hurt children, teaching them the signs of grooming behavior so they can protect the next generation, breaking the cycle of family loyalty that enables predators. Lily is 18 now, about to start college. She wants to study psychology and work with trauma survivors. Emma Rodriguez is 15, doing well in school, captain of her debate team. The other victims have gone on to build lives despite what Julian did to them. They're resilient in ways I'll never fully understand. I think about what my mother said that day at the courthouse, how I'd destroyed our family. She was right in a way. I did destroy the family we'd been, but that family was built on lies and enabling and looking away from uncomfortable truths. It needed to be destroyed. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to protect someone from the consequences of their actions, especially when those actions hurt children. I broke the code I'd lived by for 20 years, the one that said family loyalty trumped everything else. It cost me my brother, my mother, and half my relatives. But it saved Lily and Emma and those other girls from more years of abuse. That trade was worth making. Some codes deserve to be broken. Some loyalty is really just cowardice dressed up as love. Real protection means standing up to the people you love when they're causing harm, even when it destroys everything you thought you knew about them. Julian will spend most of his remaining life in prison. My family will never recover. But 6 girls got justice and safety and the chance to heal. That's what Breaking the Code bought. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.